Tight ends are such a frustrating position. Even the disappointing ones are still decent and have upside, and the ones who have produced, well, you probably shouldn't be chasing points at the tight end position. It never works out. So, let's just look at the rankings for the week 4 tight ends. And just real quick before I forget about it, because I usually do, over here on the far right, once we go through these, we'll go and have 3 tiers of tight ends to show you. On the far right there, this little column titled ECR difference, that's the difference between myself and the expert consensus ranking from Fantasy Pros website. If it's a positive number, that means I was above the ECR. If it's a negative number, that means I have them ranked below where the ECR has them ranked. I do have to apologize. I do not have the projections that I've been promising for you ready to go this week for the wide receivers, tight ends, and running backs. If you haven't seen that in my other videos, ran into some issues. I'm basically having to rebuild them from the ground up. I'm working tirelessly through these next few days in order to get those hopefully ready for next week. We'll see about that. But either way, if you do want to get a sneak peek, I was able to do them for my quarterbacks at least, so you could see in the quarterbacks video, I go over them a little bit, and they're also up on the website, www.theFFForge.com. There's a link down in the description where you can find all of my rankings, the complete rankings there, and it's a live sheet that gets updated. And it's a live sheet that gets updated throughout the week until about 2 hours prior to kickoff, at which point I pull that information and put it into my sheet that I put right up here on YouTube live 1 hour prior to kickoff. Sometimes there are still some adjustments that get made in the meantime, so if you want my most up-to-date rankings, come visit me 1 hour prior to kickoff, and if you have any start-sit questions, you can ask them there. Welcome in to the Fantasy Football Forge. My name is Steve, if I have not introduced myself yet, and before we get into these rankings, I would like to quick recap how I did in week 3 with my DFS buys and my love 'em and my fade 'em pick for the tight end position. So, I said that I thought Hunter Henry was a good buy at $4,100. He was not. That did not work out. Going down into the discount bin at $3,100, I liked Cade Otton to give you a shot to pay off, and I mean, he did almost match Hunter Henry's fantasy point total for what that's worth. I think within 0.5 or 0.6 points, but that wasn't worth much. And for a contrarian play, I thought Kyle Pitts at $3,900. I thought that nobody would be stupid enough to spend $3,900 on Kyle Pitts with some of the guys that were behind him, and at a tight end 16 finish, he wasn't really helpful for the cause, unfortunately, but he was better than Hunter Henry and Cade Otton. And as far as my fade 'em and my love 'em results, I loved Taysom Hill as a guy who I thought might end up having a massive week, and hopefully even if he didn't end up having one of those big Taysom Hill days with the injuries to their running back, Jamal Williams, I thought, maybe he still finds the end zone. Green Bay is not a great rushing defense. And unfortunately, that didn't come through. And for my fade 'em, I had David Njoku, who only scored 4 fantasy points. So let's move on to the week 4 tight end rankings. In my first tier goes 11 tight ends deep. That's a little bit deep, but we have some new entrants in here, and we have some people who were not quite willing to say you shouldn't start them if you have them. So, starting off at tight end 1, we have Travis Kelce, followed by TJ Hawkinson. No surprise there. Then I have Evan Ingram as my tight end 3 this week, and per my count, he has been the 4th best tight end, or most valuable tight end, through 3 weeks in the season so far. Zay Jones is not expected to play again, so I think that helps with him being a little bit more reliable, a little bit less chance of him having kind of a bad game in that circumstance. And Atlanta has allowed the 4th most fantasy points to the tight end position through the first 3 weeks of the season, and they really haven't faced any of the big name tight ends that were top 12 tight ends preseason. I think the most notable tight end so far would be Sam Laporta that they faced, who lit him up last week. And so given the talent that they've played against so far, Sam Laporta's been great. He still is a rookie. He's not supposed to be doing that to defenses. I do think that the tight end spot might be a true weakness for this Atlanta defense season long. And so I'm going to bet on that this week with Evan Ingram, who I think has a good shot to have a good week. I do have him over George Kittle, Mark Andrews. Hopefully you didn't go out and spend draft capital on both of those guys, but if you did, feel free to ignore this ranking. It's where I'm expecting things to end at the end of the week for just concerns about the consistency for George Kittle with all of their weapons there, and Mark Andrews' concerns about the matchup and how he's performed for the last going back into last season. Whenever he's been banged up, it really hasn't been too pretty for him overall. Do have a little bit of hope for a big week here against Cleveland. I think he's had some success against Cleveland in the past, but I'm still concerned about it, and I really like the situation for Evan Ingram. Then looking at my tight end 6 and 8 there, Sam Laporta, Luke Musgrave, they both played last night, so did they go off or not? Was my rankings on each of them justified? As far as Luke Musgrave goes, he's my love him of the week. That's not too exciting going into the rest of the week after these rankings are posted, but still, how did I do last night? Did he deserve the love him or not? And at tight end 7, we have Darren Waller. He has a good shot to come through for you this week, I think, going up against Seattle, so I do like him quite a bit. And then Dallas Goedert, Pitts, Freiermuth. You're going to have to trust these guys again. When looking at Kyle Pitts going up against Jacksonville, that's been a good matchup for tight end so far this season. Dallas Goedert is still an amazing, if not an elite tight end on an elite offense going up against the Washington Commanders. And sure, Pat Freiermuth is reliant on touchdowns. That's really been a part of his profile, I think, throughout most of his career, but it's the tight end position. Most tight ends are reliant on touchdowns. They don't get a touchdown, they don't do much for you usually. He's just gotten into the end zone a lot throughout his career, and I do expect that to continue. Hopefully the target rate starts to increase a little bit more, so that way he has a safer floor, though that would be absolutely huge, but going up against Houston this week. So I like those guys as much as you can like them. I think they're must-starts. And that's going to bring us into my second tier of tight ends, basically your streaming options, the guys who could very easily, and some of them will, outscore some of these guys who don't have good weeks. So Tyler Higbee in at tight end 12. I'm just going to talk a little bit about each of these guys. No tight end left behind is the motto. So Tyler Higbee, assuming he is a go, these things do mean that they are technically on the injury report, and I will update this after the Thursday injury reports are all out for each position. But Tyler Higbee, it's a neutral matchup here this week going up against Indianapolis. He's been a top 8 tight end so far this season, and he's always on the field, so he's definitely a part of that offense, and I think he has one of the safer floors of any tight end, with a little bit of a ceiling in one of these matchups like Indianapolis, I think. Then Logan Thomas in at tight end 13, and Philadelphia has been the single best matchup for tight end so far this season. I don't think that that'll be the case when all is said and done by the end of the year, but they are a fine matchup for another top 8 type of tight end in his 1.7 games played so far this season. Once again, he's a guy that I was high on early in the offseason due to the addition of Eric Bieniemy in this coaching staff, and so far it has seemed like the tight end is definitely a part of the game plan for this offense. And at tight end 14, we have Gerald Everett, and especially if Eckler is still out this week, I like him much more than I did coming into the season. Much of his success last season and why he was so usable was due to injuries to the wide receivers, and we just saw an injury to one of the wide receivers again in Mike Williams, unfortunately. On top of that, Justin Herbert has, throughout his entire career, tended to like his tight ends quite a bit and keep them involved at very least. Then Hunter Henry at tight end 15 is my fade. I'm going up against Dallas this week. He's had a fantastic start to the season because he's had a couple of touchdowns. And I do think that the tight end's going to be a part of this New England offense this season, so I like him season long. But this week, going up against Dallas, it's a tough matchup, so I'm willing to give some other guys a shot over him. Then Dalton Kincaid in at my tight end 16. He is slightly out-targeted Dawson Knox. I don't love how far apart I have the ranking of Dalton Kincaid and Dawson Knox this week. Regardless, Miami has not been great against tight ends, and this sets up to be the highest scoring game of the entire week of all matchups. And we want touchdowns from our tight ends, and the higher scoring the matchup is, the more touchdowns we expect, and the more touchdowns there are, the higher the chance that our tight end ends up getting a touchdown on the week, or maybe 2. Then we move on to Jake Ferguson in at tight end 17. And I just don't like the matchup against New England very much. Then Cole Kmet in at tight end 18 going up against Denver. And believe it or not, he is still a borderline top 12 type of tight end this season. So I look for this offense to finally be able to move the ball this week going up against Denver, which has been a really poor defense so far this season. And that's not even including last week's results. In that case, it's been an abysmal defense so far this season. We will consider that to be an outlier for them, though, so it's been a really poor defense. Then at tight end 19, I have David Njoku. He's on the field a lot, but he does not get targeted much, and I am starting to think that very well could be a Deshaun Watson thing. That was a little part of my hesitancy with him in the off season. I don't ever recall Deshaun Watson targeting his tight ends a whole lot, but did he ever have a great tight end either? Yeah, I don't think so. Then at tight end 20, we have Zach Ertz, and he gets targeted a lot, but going up against a really good defense, I'd rather just stay away from these Arizona players as much as possible, at least. If they beat San Francisco this week, and then after just upsetting Dallas last week, I'll change my tune on that real quickly. Then at tight end 21, we have Dawson Knox, and I think he's usable for all the same reasons that I like Dalton Kincaid. There is an argument to be had that Dawson Knox should be ranked higher than Dalton Kincaid. He's on the field more, he tends to have Josh Allen's trust around the goal line over a guy like Dalton Kincaid, and he's been the better tight end through 3 weeks in fantasy football. So far, for fantasy purposes, I should say. And that brings it down to my final tier of tight ends. Before we wrap this video up, I have Hayden Hurst at tight end 22 going up against Minnesota. Chigoziem Okonkwo at tight end 23 going up against Cincinnati. Like the upside there, potentially. We just haven't seen it from Chig. And then Dalton Schultz in at tight end 24, Jonnu Smith at 25, Juwan Johnson, K. Dotton, Durham Smythe, Kylan Granson, Noah Fant, Tyler Conklin, Mike Gesicki, and I do not have Irv Smith Jr. ranked as of right now. I do believe that going up against Tennessee, he'd probably be like right up between Dawson Knox and Hayden Hurst, maybe around that area. If I had to guess, if he were to get ranked, saw them rely on that tight end position quite a bit last week. So Irv Smith will have his days eventually here. Those are my tight end rankings. Let's get you back up top there, and let's look at what my DFS buys are this week for the tight end position. I do think at $3,400 that Pat Freiermuth is a good buy this week. I'm going to take a shot on him getting into the end zone and maybe racking up a little bit of yardage finally in this game with a couple of targets. I think it's very much possible against Houston. Then in the discount bin, not a whole lot cheaper. I'd probably just go for this unless I just happen to have $300 extra hanging around. Logan Thomas at $3,100 feels like a good purchase for me. And then a contrarian play would be Chig Okonkwo, also at $3,100. And I do have a second contrarian play because of the price. This is kind of like the Kyle Pitts argument last week. Nobody's going to be stupid enough to pay this price. At $4,000, we got Cole Kmet. And he just looks out of place when you look at the tight ends and you're trying to pick one. I think people will definitely be overlooking Cole Kmet. He's still been fairly highly targeted, and they're playing against Denver this week. So it wouldn't be shocking if he has a good game, is what I'm saying. And so, yeah, you're looking for a guy and just to play the contrarian role at tight end. There you go. That's it for my tight end video. Thank you very much for stopping on through. Once again, come visit me. If you have any start-sit questions on Sunday, hope to see you there. Bye-bye. 1 hour prior to kickoff.